Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to Abraham Education, where we have a special guest today, our sister Naima Roberts, who we are talking to about parenting when spouses disagree. Sister, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure to have you. You are in Egypt, correct?
Yes, I am. So if there are any glitches with the internet, then you guys know what's going on.
Yes, mashallah. We're happy to have you here. I'm in the United States, in the state of Minnesota. So, I personally don't think you need much of an introduction. However, I am going to talk about how I know about you and how I came to invite you on to this channel to have a talk about this issue specifically. Okay. Sorry, I'm just checking. I'm a public school teacher in the United States of America. I train teachers about Muslim kids. I wrote a book about for non-Muslim teachers about how to teach Muslim kids, how to respect their religion and culture and all this type of stuff. When I was doing my graduate work with Hamlin University in the United States, part of what I did with that was research children's literature, K through 12 type literature, that featured Muslim people to try to find books that would be good for use in schools for what they call culturally relevant teaching. Now, there's a whole lot of bad in that when you talk about books that feature Muslims, but there has been efforts by people such as yourself and others where there's actually some pretty good resources for that. In the UK, people are way ahead of the Muslim community is way ahead of this than what we are in the United States. So, I found out about you in researching these books. The first book of yours that I found was this one, She Wore Red Trainers. And, literature is a really big thing with kids. Okay, we talk about parenting, how to bring our kids along in a good way and keep their iman intact in this modern world on this channel. Young adult literature is something that we need more of for Muslim youth, written for them to teach them. I know from 14 years of teaching, 6 in elementary school, 7 in high school, there is a type of reader, especially a type of female reader, who has to read books where a boy has a crush on a girl or a girl has a crush on a boy. It's just a type of reader that is out there, Muslim or non-Muslim. And for a Muslim, there's maybe some males, but really it's pretty much female. It's really female readers who read this type of books. Certainly see it in high school. I taught 4th grade for 5 years. Even in 4th grade, you actually see it. And you actually see it with some of you see with some of the girls. I mean, there's girls who are very mature readers at 4th grade, and they can actually read young adult fiction at that age, and they have curiosity towards these things. So, a lot of those books, and as much as people are consuming so much video and so much audio in the digital age and all that type of thing, books are still extremely important because people take in books in a different way. They internalize them differently. They get closer. They form a closer, more active connection to a book when they're consuming it than versus media which they consume passively. So this book is very important for Muslim youth, Muslim females especially, because it is a book about 2 characters, or I say characters, Amira and Ali, who they develop a crush on one another by happenstance, but they want to do everything the right way, and they navigate doing that in the context of being Western Muslim children of immigrants. Something extremely relevant to our Muslim youth. My school that I work at in Minneapolis Public Schools has this book in the library. I've seen many students read it and enjoy it and benefit from it a lot. The other book that I discovered at the time when I was researching you was From My Sister's Lips. This book is almost 20 years old now.
I know.
It's a little higher reading level, but still perfectly accessible for high school students. And in this book, you talk about your own revert story, and you also talk to other sisters who reverted. And, for our Muslim youth growing up in the West, who maybe they are not reverts themselves, but, they have to go through a journey of coming to an intellectual conviction about Islam. They do, because the reality of the modern times, especially in the West, is we don't have the cultural constraints that will keep kids on the path and keep them behaving the way we want them to behave and all that type of stuff. just going about things willy-nilly. So they have to develop that intellectual conviction. And there's story after story of sisters in the West who went through that, coming from non-Muslim families to becoming Muslim, including yourself. And it's highly relatable, highly critically acclaimed. So even though these are older books, I know you've written other books since then and that type of thing, and you didn't ask me to point these out or anything like that. I just, for the benefit of my audience, I wanted to point those 2 books out because they are books that are good to have in the home, good to have available, especially to your daughters to be able to read as they get older. And also too in schools. Both of those books are appropriate for public school life, certainly, at least in America. UK is maybe a little different, but,
Yeah.
but certainly in libraries as well as classroom use. And the school that your child goes to, if you send your child to a public school, they should be encouraged to have those books, and the other ones by our sister. So, sister, having known about you for a while, I've been on social media for 2 years now. Like, I was doing my work in education, training this type of stuff about 2 years ago. Some brothers really encouraged me to get on social media and start, letting people know about what I was doing. And my idea with that, because I have a program and a book for non-Muslim educators that I want Muslim parents to bring to their child's school and encourage them to take it, this type of thing. So my whole thinking and getting on social media and what I've done is I'm going to make a channel that's focused on Muslim parents and helping and help have Muslim parents benefit from what I know from 14 years of being around kids nonstop, and also teaching teachers. I also train teachers. And the things that I've learned that are methods on how you get kids to respect you, how you maintain authority with them, but how you also maintain connection with them, how they learn, how they think, the development, all this type of stuff. I'm trying to have Muslim parents benefit from and use it in a way to meet our goals as Muslim parents in raising kids in the modern times. Now, in doing that, I get inquiries all the time about this or that issue from parents all the time. There's a whole array of things. As frequently as I get inquiries about parenting, I get inquiries about marriage, or a issue with a child comes alongside an issue with a parent. And I personally think of this channel, it's not a marriage channel. Like there's so much content on Muslim social media talking about marriage. You'd think it'd be oversaturated, but it's really not. So, I wanted to bring you on to talk about some of these things because even though I knew you from that past of being an author and writing literature for Muslim youth, when I discovered you on social media, most of what you were talking about was marriage and doing all, I think you had a big marriaging conference, all this type of stuff. So I'm curious, how did you come to that? Because you more established yourself as an author. Well, how did you come to be doing so much content on social media about marriage? And, a lot of times when I watch the marriaging contents, some of it's a mix of things, but, like it will be mentioned casually, like when there's problems, it affects the kids as bad if, it affects on the kids. But I want to dig a little deeper into that and talk about these issues and what Muslim parents need to be doing in these situations where they're having issues with their spouse and this type of thing.
Bismillah, Jazakallah khairan for that muqaddimah, that introduction to kind of how we came to be here. In answer to your question, obviously being an author is my main thing. Alhamdulillah, I've been given opportunities to speak and, I've done coaching, I've been a coach. I still am very much a book coach. That's my work, that's my line of work. And the marriage stuff actually came up because I just was in a space in my life where I was listening to a lot of conversations, right? A lot of the conversations that were online, I noticed that there was a polarization that was happening. And I think the polarization, whether it's continuing or whether it's lessening, I'm not sure. But the polarization is this: women talk to other women in women's ways about women's things and develop an echo chamber of their own. Sisters do this, right? So their understanding of everything is through their prism, which is a very women-focused prism. And I was in that prism for a very long time, right? So that was my reality. So if I ever thought about marriage, I always saw it from the point of view of sisters. And usually, unfortunately, the conversation would be how tough it is for sisters. how hard it is for sisters, how the brothers don't get it, how the brothers don't do, how the brothers this, right?
Okay.
And then it was, I think, in 2020 into 2021, I started plugging into men's spaces, and you discover very much the same thing. Men talking to men about men's issues and men's views, and developing an echo chamber where they only hear their own point of view.
Mm,
And it still is shocking to me to see how very different those two worlds actually are,
mm,
and how a couple can describe their marriage. You listen to one side and it sounds like she's the victim, he's the perpetrator, she's innocent, he's guilty, that's all that it is. And of course, when you listen to him, he's got his own narrative, he's got his own version of the whole story. And when you listen to him, it's like he's a victim and she's the perpetrator, and he's innocent and she's guilty. So really, the whole marriage conversation, the goal of it was for brothers and sisters to come and listen to the same conversations
mm,
and start to discuss issues. It wasn't really a case of men versus women. It was more a case of, let's start listening to the same things at least. And let's start listening, if we're sisters, let's start actually listening to brothers' takes on things. If we're brothers, let's start hearing what the sisters say, so that we can try to integrate our understanding, right? And try to come to some sort of higher level of understanding of how marriage works, what marriage is all about, what it's for, what it requires from us, than we kind of have at the moment. And I don't know whether we were successful, but I do know that at the time, I remember Baba Ali from Half Deen said, these are conversations that no one's having.
mm,
Because when the shiuch talk about marriage, they talk about it in terms of the fiqh of it, okay, the
right,
theology of it, which we are all familiar with, mashallah.
right.
When sisters talk about marriage, often they have a bias towards sisters, right? So they only reflect what sisters feel and see, and it's all very emotional. And what we were able to do, alhamdulillah, was to address very, very topical issues with a range of speakers. You had scholars, you had therapists, you had people been married for 35 years, and hopefully trying to remind people of what the purpose of marriage really is. Forget the cultural conditioning,
Right.
forget all the noise on social media, forget the couple goals, forget all that. What is marriage about for Muslims, and how can we ensure that we do better at this task of marriage than we have been doing to date? So that's really it was literally, I saw a need. Alhamdulillah, I had the contacts to be able to call people and say, would you come on my show? And Allah gave us the tawfiq to record however many episodes and conferences and all of that we did, alhamdulillah. So that's really where it came from.
Yeah, mashallah. So the questions that I get, let's start with divorce. Okay, like we'll start from the more difficult to maybe the simpler. Probably the most frequent inquiry that I get is from both brothers and sisters. They're divorced, and the parents, the other parent is parenting in an entirely different way. And actually, a lot of times, usually involves an element of that parent feels like their child has been turned against them by the other parent. And certainly the dynamic of the people that I have spoken to is that that parent sees themselves as the more religious parent. So they want the kid being religious. They want the kid studying Quran. They want the kid praying by the time he or she's 7 and 8. They want them restricted from what they consume on television, all that type of stuff. And then the other parent has a looser attitude towards that. And the impression of the parent who's complaining to me is that that's being taken advantage of, because of course kids are going to go towards what they perceive as fun. And then if they perceive one parent as being more fun than the others, it's not really a fair dynamic. So I'd like to throw that out there. What are your thoughts for a parent who's in that type of situation? What would be your advice for them?
Oh, this is why I could never do marriage counseling. Oh gosh, it is so hard. Human beings are tough. We really are a piece of work. I would like to push back a little bit and say, let's not start with divorce.
Okay,
Let's
sure.
start with where we can make a difference, right? Because the thing is, by the time couples have divorced, it's
Sure.
not that it's too late, But
Okay.
like any advice that we give is going to be limited in its scope, right? Because at the end of the day, we're not therapists, and the two of them haven't come to us to say, help us navigate this new this new chapter in our lives. It usually isn't like that. It's usually one parent who is upset with the dynamic, and the other one couldn't care less. Other one's fine. Other one is like, hey, I'm good. You know what I mean? So our advice will only ever be able to be to that parent who's actually, who has the issue and is coming forward with it, right? But I want to say this: we will go into, how to manage that situation. But I'd like to say this: we talk about a marriage crisis, right? We talk about a marriage crisis. We talk about people not being able to get married, people not being able to stay married. People can't even be divorced correctly, for God's sake, right? Seriously, it's like our desires have taken us over completely, because at every single stage, whether it's you're having difficulty, trying to find someone or trying to accept someone or whatever the case may be, to actually being in a marriage that's healthy and whole, right? To actually being divorced in a way that is, respectful and calm and Islamic, right? It is the nafs that gets in the way every single time. It's our nafs, it's our desires, it's the dunya, it's this focus on temporal happiness, it's this focus on materialism, it's this focus on appearances, on status, on things that have nothing to do with akhirah. And I'm not saying that all problems that couples have within the marriage are to do with what I'm stating, but a lot of them are being exacerbated by the fact that we are not doing this for Allah. We're not anymore. That's the truth. Yeah, we've got this laundry list of things that we require from our spouses, and we're not alone. It's a cultural phenomenon. We as Muslims are part of it. Esther Perel talks about this in her Mating in Captivity book, I believe, where she just talks about how our expectations of that marital relationship have gone completely beyond what any other generation has ever seen. And we're talking worldwide here, right? Once upon a time, you got married because you knew you were going to get married. It's a normal thing, right? It's like you're a child, then you have youth, and then you find somebody and you settle down and you have your own family. That is the way of the world, right? And practically every society worked like that. That was just the norm. Here we are, postmodern society. Everything is a choice, right? You have a choice about, for how long your childhood should last, even, right? There's a choices there. How long youth should last. There's choices there. You've got people in the youth stage at 30, at 35, right? Still living their life free, having fun. They call it living your best life, just behaving like they have no responsibilities, like the future will take care of itself, just no eye on this is the way that things should go. And of course, not to mention the number of people in that age bracket now who say, I don't know whether I want to get married. Or if I get married, I don't know whether I want to have kids, or I don't want to have kids, or I don't want to get married. You know what I'm saying? So the whole, like you said before, the social structure that all societies relied on to guide young people through those stages has completely, I would say pretty much completely vanished. Muslims, I think we held on for quite a while. We've definitely held on longer than societies in the West. But I think with the millennials, we're done. Like it's not there anymore, because even they don't see the benefit of that. And maybe they'll need to get to a certain stage where they look back and they see what they did with their generation of kids coming up. And then they'll be like the boomers saying, we should never have done that. We should have gone back and we should have valued kind of the structure that we once had. Anyway, my point is this. Sorry, did you want to jump in?
No, you're just going to say a point. So say that and I'll jump in.
Yeah, no. So the point that I want to make is this. If we have any hope of bringing some healing to our homes within the next generation or two, the Gen X's like me and the millennials need to start firstly unlearning all the crap that we've learned, okay, since we've been in this space that we're in. Unlearning a lot of the materialist and all of the stuff that's kind of clogging us, right? Going back to what does Allah say? What does his messenger say? What is the Islamic way of life? And teaching our children that. If the millennials can figure it out fast enough, Gen Z, forget it. It's too late, right? Gen Z, Allah yarhamhum, yani. May Allah have mercy on them. And those who, inshallah, come to that understanding themselves, there will be some who will do that, right? But their parents no longer have the authority to do that. It's too late for a lot of the parents to be able to now say, by the way, maybe you want to think about getting married rather than getting your second master's. You know what I mean? It's like a bit late now because a lot of these kids, they've left home. Even that situation of children living with their parents until marriage, it's gone. A lot of kids move out now. If they can, they move out, they go to college, and then they don't come back home. So anyway,
even in the Muslim world, this is increasing, correct?
Exactly, right? So let's not cry over spilt milk. My call is this. Those of us who have understood or can see the effects of the boomer and Gen X parenting, right? So the immigrants and the children of immigrants, let's put it that way. The immigrants who came, and then their children, who a lot of them were raised in the West, we need to look and see, okay, what are the real effects of the way that we chose to raise our kids, right? And then we need to start speaking about it, being honest about it, so that the next generation can do things differently and start to heal things from the family onwards. Because if we're raising our sons to be husbands and raising our daughters to be wives, that is very different to what's happening now. Because right now, we're just raising individuals, right? And I say individuals in quotes because maybe you'll disagree with me on this, okay? And you probably will because you're an educator, right? But I have a problem with some of the parenting approaches that I see Muslims swallowing wholeheartedly, right?
Okay. You mean Western parenting approaches? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. The ones that are common on
I don't
social
disagree with
media.
you. I talk about this. Go ahead.
Okay, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I really would, because I see Muslim therapists and psychologists and parenting coaches, etc. I see them embracing this very individualistic approach to, your child is unique and your child knows, kind of who they are, and your job as the parent is to respect the child, and, basically child-led, right? And it's concerning to me because I can't help thinking that the final result may be a child who feels very confident. It should be, I should hope, right? Who doesn't have issues with regards to self-esteem and self-worth, right? Maybe they think you're a fantastic parent. Maybe you guys are really close, right? Wonderful. But our job is to raise our children, right? To rabbihim, to give them tarbiyah, right? Is to teach them. And that is not child-led. That is parent-led, right? I, as a parent, I have a curriculum. Like, I have an assignment from my Lord. And my Lord told me, I'm giving you this child as amana. I need you to teach them what I have taught you. I need you to bring them up upon Tawheed. I need you to bring them up as Muslims, right? Which means it's parent-led, because I am the one who's responsible. Allah's going to question me. Allah's not going to ask my child, right? If they get to whatever stage, if I didn't emphasize the salah, for example, right? Because, and this is the thing, it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but here's where we are as parents. I don't want to force my child to do X, Y, and Z because I don't want them to leave the deen. I don't want them to hate the deen. I don't want them to hate Islam the way I felt when my parents kept saying, you have to do this or you go to hell, right? So you have this pendulum swing to the other side where parents are actually, I'm going to say we are afraid to insist or to have expectations or to have standards or to ensure that our child knows, no, this is the line and this is the limit, because we're afraid of losing our kids. So anyway, I've gone completely off track. My point was, if we want to avoid more divorces with every generation, we need to change the way we are raising our children from now, basically, so that by the time they grow up, all of this business about everybody waiting until they're in their 30s to get married, we need to stop that. All this business about children, young people not being ready to be a wife or husband at 25. That's our fault. Yeah. That's us. It's because we didn't emphasize those skills, because we never told them getting married was important, because we were so afraid of being like the last generation's aunties. You know what I'm saying? Who all they were saying was, oh, when you're a wife, when you're a wife. And I know sisters feel this, right? Sisters feel this, like, oh, all I used to hear when I was growing up, or all my mom used to hear when she was growing up, but one day you'll get married. Don't do this for your husband. All of this stuff. And so that what the next generation do then is they say nothing about it.
Right.
They don't mention marriage at all. It's like, it's fine if you get married. It's you've got more important things to do. Yep. You've got your education, you need to fulfill your potential. You need to do this, you need to do that, and marriage will come. But those sisters who are in their 30s and 40s who never got married, or those sisters in their 30s and 40s, or even late 20s who are not in any way ready to be a wife, a lot of them, their parents failed them. Their parents failed them. And I want to call out the mums on this as well as the dads, right? So can we do better? Can we actually get our daughters excited about being married? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Because trust me, they get excited about all sorts of other things. If they're on social media, they get excited about the blooming Notebook, for goodness sake, okay? That's where their heads are at. They're reading the romance novels, they're watching the sitcoms, they're watching the movies, and that's where their heads are at. And at home is silence. No one mentions anything. So what I'm saying is we need to be proactive. Whatever we've learned about how marriages work, or the role of marriage, or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us within a marriage, teach it to our children from young and prepare them for the responsibility of marriage earlier. Okay, and facilitate it for them earlier. So be supportive of them earlier, because otherwise we will find ourselves in a situation where a huge percentage of Muslim youth are simply not getting married. And don't think for a second, guys, that they're not getting married and they're celibate. They're not. That's not what's happening. Anyway.
Jazakallah khair, sister. Well, I have all kinds of thoughts. I'm not going to go, I would have to restrain myself from going too long on talking about the progressive education stuff, what you're talking about. I talk a lot about that on my channel, actually. I talk about it. Chapter 5 of my book actually is devoted to that. Because, actually part of this child-centered approach to education in the West, people who buy into that, they buy into the idea of culturally relevant teaching as well. Because, okay, if the child's from a different culture and we have all these students nowadays in American education from immigrants, we have to respect that. What I tell educators is, okay, if you buy into that, then when you're educating a Muslim child, that actually means you're going to give them a more traditional type education. Because that's actually what their culture calls for. And in very practical terms, just concerning pedagogy and how they're taught. But, with what you're saying with, the child-centered approach, it's part of how the West is lost. That is an element of their misguidance. Now, both the Muslim world and the Western world in the 20th century, there were generations who went through massive trauma. The Muslim world through colonization and all the wars that happened. But even preceding that, not necessarily preceding that, but for the Western world, the trauma of the world wars. My grandfather's generation was traumatized by so many of the men going into service and serving in World War II or serving in Korea, maybe Vietnam as well. And then, Gen X in the West, they were traumatized by their parents' parenting because they were very harsh and very reactionary. And always parenting in a way where you're operating off of stress reactions, which means the child does something that triggers you or annoys you. And kids do things that annoy adults. That is part of how they are. That is part of how they will test you. So they trigger stress reactions in adults. And a mode, the lazy mode of parenting, but the intuitive mode of parenting is to operate on those stress reactions, which means you're always yelling at the kid. You maybe hit the kid, all this type of stuff. And then, then the kid gets traumatized. Now, when they grow up, some of them will do the exact same thing, maybe without thinking about it, or they will form a justification of that was actually right. So what happened to me was fine. What you see more commonly, and I think it's probably more common amongst females, they feel very much that was wrong. So an alternative that is the exact opposite looks appealing. And
Yes.
the nature of the West is that because of their misguidance, when they discover a problem with themselves and in their
Mm.
history, in their cultural trajectory, the only place that they have to go is exactly what you said, to swing to the other extreme.
Right.
So you have this whole child-centered approach, and really actually goes back a long way. You know, in the 90s, they called it the self-esteem movement in education, you know.
Right.
So you constantly you just build up the kids' self-esteem. Now it's changed to more you make sure the kid is seen and they can be their authentic self and all this type of stuff. I actually
Oh, this
I,
authentic self thing is killing me right now.
I,
SubhanAllah.
I actually have a video on my YouTube channel. I was talking at a masjid a couple of weeks ago where I was saying how that message is part of what is causing kids in this generation so much anxiety. If you know
Mm,
anything
mm,
about the developmental trajectory about kids, and also, you know, all the stuff that's known nowadays about neuroscience and brain development, all this type of thing, the nature of being a kid is you are going to change a lot. You have a
right.
lot of change go on up until your 20s. Now,
Mm,
if
mm,
you are constantly told to be yourself, be you, be who you are, all that type of thing, the way a kid intakes that is, I don't really know who I am, but it sounds like I'm supposed to know who I am. So there
mm.
must be something wrong with me. And then they feel depressed about
Wow.
that or they feel anxious about that. Oftentimes, as a coping mechanism, they will go to some extreme regarding that, which is why we
They'll
have this
find
generation,
something.
yes,
Mm,
who's playing around with their identities and all this type of stuff. And, you know, I mean, to me, there is a nefarious movement to feed all that and this type of thing. So, you know, I always end up doing this on my streams. I don't want to overplug my stuff, but I do want people to look into my parenting course. Last summer, I live streamed every Saturday. I did a parenting course showing myself in the classroom and all stuff. So I was trying to teach everything I know about teaching. There is a way that you hold kids accountable and that
mm.
you get them to naturally buy in to your authority, but you
Mm.
maintain respect and connection with them. There is a way to do
That's
it.
really important.
A huge element to it is actually nonverbal communication. And,
Mm,
and even though the trend we're describing is the prevailing trend in education in the West, there is a sub enclave of educators, both in academia as well as just practicing in the field, who push against that. Their views don't predominate, but if you actually look at the best research, it validates that all that
mm.
progressive stuff is garbage. Who push
Wow.
back against that,
Mm,
and the behavior managements who do the best work with that, they look at nonverbal communication, and that's a big thing I teach about. Go ahead, sister, please.
No, no, I'll come back to that point. I want to hear about the non-verbal education, the non-verbal communication, actually, because you can drop some gems on us during this stream. I would like to hear about that, but I
Yeah.
will make a point about the child feeling the pressure. But it's a story, so please tell us about non-verbal communication first.
Well, look, kids are highly sensitive to nonverbal communication. Now, this is something that has been studied very intentionally in education. A big part of what I do with teacher training in Minneapolis public schools, as well as elsewhere, for the behavior management aspect of it, is about nonverbal communication. So kids are highly sensitive to things like facial expression, tone of voice, body posture, all this type of stuff. There is a bank of mannerisms.
Mm,
There's a body of things that has been studied and that is known to work that kids respond to get compliance when they do these triggering things, when they talk back, okay, when they start misbehaving. There's a way to walk towards a kid that they're more
mm,
likely to redirect themselves into compliance versus
right.
if you walk to them in a stressful way. When a kid talks back to you, there's things you can do. There's a way to hold a resting face. All these types of things
Mm,
that kids are known to respond to. It
right.
honestly is something that exists on a scientific level. You know, a stream like this isn't the place to teach these
Okay.
things because you have to learn about it in a kind of
Mm,
academic way. This is
okay.
why I put a course together. I live streamed it. I've taken most of it down on YouTube because I do have it behind a paywall now because I'm planning to get funds for it so I can pay for advertising for it because it's honestly stuff people need.
Inshallah.
It's honestly stuff
Mm,
people need.
absolutely.
But you know,
Absolutely.
also too, a lot of it really does relate to the character of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam.
Yeah.
Because the Prophet, he didn't have this stressed out type of character where he's yelling at everyone all the time, all that type of thing. You know, like there's a famous story of a boy who asked him to make zina halal, which completely relates to our times. You know, and the people around started yelling and admonishing that boy,
Yeah.
and the prophet walked over to him. He told him to sit down, which is a known relaxing technique. That's a de-escalation technique. That's how you have the kid sit down. He put his hand on his shoulder, which is another calming
Wow.
technique. You know, and he asked, would you, you know, do you have a mother? Would you like that for your mother? You know, I'm that is only one example. You know, he's known to I believe it's Anas ibn Abbas ibn Malik, who lived in the household of the Prophet for 10 years.
Yeah.
And he said, not once did the Prophet say to me, oof.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so there's actually very, very real things here that connect to the character of the Sunnah that, you know, we need to learn in a detailed, intentional way,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you have to be intentional about the parenting. You know, like and not operating on stress reactions is a big part of it. That's the big thing.
Yeah, I think what you said about the many of our Muslim cultures, not all, obviously, and I want to make that very clear, because people often think Muslim culture, i.e., Arab or Desi, but of course we know that Muslim cultures are much broader than that. And if you bring in Malaysian and Indonesian culture, you bring in African culture, you'll see that there's a lot more diversity, even in the cultures themselves and the temperaments of the people, right? But we can say that the ones that predominate in the West, the culture is very emotional, right? It's very driven by emotion, and those emotions could be pride, anger, you know, especially pride and anger. Those are big. Okay, pride, anger. You've got emotional manipulation. You've got all the gaslighting and that kind of things. Oh, you know, I'm your mother and I did all of this for you. You know, guilting is a big one. Shame. All of these types of things are like a big part of how parents get their children to comply. And you mentioned the word compliance, and I thought of how that word is almost like a dirty word in the whole progressive, child-centered kind of world. It's like, you know, children shouldn't have to comply. Who are you at the end of the day? Like, it's like they shouldn't have to comply. You know, that indicates that there's a differential or whatever the case may be. But I think that I agree with you, and I wish, and I'm not going to say I wish. I hope that we can move towards a space where Muslims take marriage and parenting so seriously that they will invest in a course, or two or three. They will invest in a course on marriage. Yes, you need to know the rights and responsibilities. You need to know that, right? But do you need a course on rights and responsibilities? I'd argue you could read a book. Okay, it's okay. But then there's other aspects of marriage. Truly studying the Sunnah and the Seerah. Oh my goodness, brother! If we could disseminate the knowledge of the prophetic character and what that character looked like in marriage, looked like in parenting, looked like in trade, I'm sure the books are there. But if we could disseminate that knowledge so that Muslims actually begin to embody some of those characteristics, it would be a revolution. It would be an absolute revolution, because like you said, quite rightly, the Prophet ﷺ is the example. And he was a man who was in his frame. He held frame all the time, right? And that's something that in our cultures even is not a thing. You know, I laugh because I remember there was a time, and I guess this still is, this idea that women are the emotional ones, right? Women are emotional, men are rational, you know, and that's how it works. But if anyone has had an experience within certain cultures, when a man gets angry, he's angry. Okay. If you upset him, and it could be a small thing or a big thing, but he has no control over his emotions. He's emotional, like he is in his feelings right now. You know what I mean? If a man feels some kind of jealousy, or he sees something he doesn't like, he's going to be in his emotions too, right? So this idea that women are the emotional ones, no, they just show it differently. But all of us need to work on emotional regulation. And you use the word de-escalation. Those are lost arts in many of our cultures. And, you know, our parents, grandparents, they didn't have access, I think, to the teachings that would help them to stay calm.
Absolutely.
staying calm, even if you just said, look, just you know, that keep calm and carry on, that meme from the 90s.
Yeah.
Even if all you did was that,
Mhm.
it would cut 50% of the mushkilat in your house.
Yeah.
Just keep calm.
Yes.
Sis, keep calm. Brother, keep calm.
Yep.
You know, kids, keep calm. Just
Yeah.
stay calm, okay? You know what I mean? Stay calm, take a moment, you know, choose your response. Just those types of things. They should be in every school curriculum. We should be teaching this to people. And I don't think that we are, subhanAllah. But, you know, I wanted to tell you this story because you mentioned about the stress. So I watched a very, very interesting podcast. It was about a mother who had transed two of her sons, right? I hope we're allowed to
Trans,
talk about this.
like
Yeah, she had transitioned them. Yes.
Okay.
Are we allowed to talk about this on the channel?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, so she had her children were very young. One was, I think, 5, and then the younger one was like 2 or 3.
Okay.
So the one that was 5 had a full social transition, changed the name, changed the clothes, used the pronouns she, her, and all of that. And then the second one also said that he wanted also to be a girl like his sister, right? So they started transitioning him as well. The lady came to a point where she realized that this was now something that she was in charge of. She said, you know, what they tell you at the beginning is that this is the child. The child, you follow the child. If the child says that, you know, I'm a boy and they're, you know, they're born a girl, or vice versa, you follow the child. You respect the child. It's a child-centered approach, right? So she said that's what we heard, right, all the time, that, you know, our child was choosing this and we just needed to be supportive and accept her as she was. But she came to the point where she realized that this isn't my child leading anymore. This is me as a parent making things happen. I'm the one who is changing their name. I'm the one who's buying them new clothes. I'm the one who is telling everybody what's going on. I'm the one taking her to gender affirming therapists. I'm doing that, right? And she made a decision to stop because she realized, I think the main thing, that the catalyst was that she realized that the second child was doing what he saw had been successful to get his older sibling attention. So the older sibling had all this attention, had all of this validation, and so many adults around kind of, you know, it's making a fuss of him. And the younger child wanted it too. You know, that he wanted a piece of it, right? So he realized, the way to get the attention from mommy and daddy is to say that I'm a girl. Okay, great. I'm going to do that. So she decided decided to stop. And the reason I'm telling this story is because she said when they sat him down and told him, we're not doing this anymore. Okay, you're a little boy and this is what's happening. He was upset initially, but the next day she just felt him relax for the first time since they had been on this whole journey. And the way she described it was that whole year and a half, or however long it was, my child was being asked to choose all the time and being expected to know all the time. It's just like you said about a child having this pressure to be their authentic self. Then they start asking, well, what is my authentic self? Like, do I even know? And if I don't, it's a problem. So she said, I had relinquished authority to my child. And my child felt the stress of that and was worried and anxious and realized kind of that this was sort of too heavy for him. And as soon as he didn't have to do that anymore, she said, it's like he melted into me. It's like he was able to be a carefree kid again and just live his life and just be a normal kid, right? Wow. I really found that so profound because, like you said, in this day and age, there is this expectation on children to know somehow. There's this intrinsic knowing that they're supposed to have. And like you said, and I think, you know, I think the whole thing has been, you know, ridiculed in a way by that book, Johnny the Walrus or whatever it's called, where the kid says, I'm a walrus. And then the mother affirms that he's a walrus. And then she goes and she buys him things that you wear like a walrus and she makes him eat like a walrus and all this stuff. But the point is, as parents, we must take back responsibility And as parents in the modern day, it means that we're not going to be the cool parents all the time. And our kids might not be the cool kids all the time, right? And our kids might not be able to, do all the things that their peers can do. And we as parents may not be able to do all the things that our peers can do, but we have to be okay with that. And I think that's the biggest difference that I see between us in the 90s and parents today. We were okay with not being cool because it was Allah and His Rasul that was the most important thing. And I know I sound like some relic from a bygone age, but seriously, there was a time when Muslims did not care, guys.
Right.
There was a time when Muslims were like, this dunya, whatever, right?
I actually want to say something. This book, that's part of the benefit of young sisters, especially reading this book, because you have a 20-year-old sister nowadays. She's grown up in the post 9/11 era, completely.
Yeah.
And I do see with a lot of these teenage Muslim girls, they don't have a full sense of the recent history and what it was like and the conscience of a Muslim from that time. And this book brings people as a way to bring them into that. And it's important for their identity formation.
And the thing is, it's something that I really believe so strongly. If we must inculcate that. I'm not saying go full zuhud. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying like relinquish the dunya and everything in it. No, but we have to have our priorities straight. And this is a reminder to myself first. We must get our priorities straight. Yeah. And if there's any question that akhirah is our number one priority, then we need to do the work to deal with that, because it will bleed into our kids, right? And with the fitan that our children are likely to face when, inshallah, they have families of their own, if they don't have that priority, you already know what's going to happen, right? I remember reading a blogger who was talking about, making predictions about the Muslim community in the US. And he was saying that he figures that the Muslim community is going to become integrated like the Christians and the Jews, basically, especially the Jews, where basically people are nominally Muslim, have Muslim names, but to all intents and purposes are pretty much the same as the society that they're in. Sure. And the only way that we are going to avoid that fate is if we go back to our origins and we go back to the basis of why we are on this earth in the first place. And that is the same whether you're trying to get married, whether you are married, or whether you're divorced. Because going back to your question, parents who have divorced, one of the things that I say is what you need to understand is that first and foremost, your priority is those children, that those children are amana, right? And they come before any feelings you may have about your ex, right? Whether it's resentment, anger, jealousy, love, whatever you've got for your ex, the kids have to come first, right? But what do you say to a couple who were not on the same page Islamically when they were married, and now they're divorced, they're still not on the same page Islamically? What do you say to them? How can you're no longer even married to the dude, or to the sister. How now do you expect to have any impact on that parent, who is doing things differently from you? It's in order to kind of give people an answer on this, I think if at all possible, try to have a space where you're both calm. Yeah. When you've just divorced, when you're divorcing, after divorce, whatever the case may be, where you sit down and try to hammer certain things out. I know it's not a guarantee, but at least have the conversations. You have to have the conversations. You can't say, oh, I'm not talking to him. I refuse to talk to him, or I'm not talking to her. She's this, she's that. None of that matters anymore. You guys have to, for the sake of Allah, calm down and come to one space where you can have a real conversation about how we're going to do this. And then you could, like you said, you have the conversation about, are we parallel parenting? Are we co-parenting? If so, what does that look like? What is in the best interest of the children, right? What is in the best interest of the children for their akhirah, for their dunya? And try to get at least some islah, try to get some common ground. But if people stay in their emotions, there's no answer to that question. There's no way they're going to be able to do it, right? Whatever you've got for your ex, You need to move that to the side and put the children front and center and say what is best for them. And I'm sure we're going to go into more detail about how to navigate specific situations in that. But I think that's at least a starting point. Wallahu alam.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. So I want to tie a few things together. Going back to what you're saying about men and anger and the emotion, to give people some insight from teaching and the culture of schools and things I know from being a teacher. Kids, as we were saying before, they always test adults. A lot of men are really mistaken. They have a very simple-minded formulation thinking that like being loud or yelling, using their strong male voice, all that type of stuff to admonish kids presents strength. Kids do not interpret that as strength. They interpret that as someone who doesn't have control over their emotions. And it is someone who exhibits emotional control that kids interpret as strong and someone worthy of respect, as well as someone who knows what they're talking about when they talk. So kids, younger kids, when you're really harsh with them, this type of thing, if they're your child, they're going to comply because they don't want to disappoint you, this type of stuff. A teacher, these days with little kids, you could get all sorts of reactions. But somewhere down the line, kids, like with a teacher who acts that way, they start formulating amongst themselves that this teacher has issues. The reason this guy's yelling at us so much is because he's crazy and he's got issues and all that type of thing. And they might be right, is one thing. Even if they're not, and you're just mistaken in thinking that you're showing them strength, for the sake of their own, emotional protection, they have to formulate that the problem is really with you. And a lot of times the problem is with you. So that is a whole thing that brothers need to understand, but all parents, when you're operating on anger and these stress reactions, from younger kids, you'll get fooled because it will get compliance out of kids when they were little, but it will turn against you in the long run because of this type of psychological formulation that they are doing. For parents in the divorce situation, again, like I said, I mean, you made a really good point about, both parents have to come to you and this type of stuff. And there's always only one side of the story. I personally, I don't have much familiarity with divorce because my parents are not divorced. My wife's parents are not divorced. We both come from cultures that are traditionally Christian, where divorce is not allowed whatsoever.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, but what I would say to that parent is be the emotionally calm parent. Be the emotionally calm parent with the kid. And I especially know too, some of these fathers where they're in a situation where they feel like the mother has turned the kid against them. Some of them have said to me they're in situations where the kid is saying very awful things to them, this type of things. Well, that child is might be hearing things about you from the mother. So now they need to test you to really find out whether or not it's true. And then find out whether or not it's true. It's not going to be based on anything that you say. It's going to be based on the way that you react to them. And the way to react, the strong way to react is to be calm and maintain your emotional composure. So you don't get into blaming the kid and you don't get into exactly what you were talking about. Whatever emotions you have towards your ex-wife or your ex-spouse, you really cannot get into a place of laying that out on the kid. Because that's the trap. That's the trap that you're being tempted to fall into that you really 100%. Do not want.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense. Oh, subhanallah. Allahumma musta'an. Allahumma musta'an. May Allah help us. It really is. It's tough. It's tough.
So, hey, can we talk? I was asked to ask you about getting kids to want to get married earlier. I was asked about that. Okay. And you have kids who are adults now, correct?
Yes, some
like
of them.
You're adults. So, and also people ask, like, what was your general parenting style? And I know from reading your books, even though you grew up in Zimbabwe, you grew up in a very Western teenage type of culture. That type of stuff. Like kids are growing up, like Muslim kids are growing up now. And I grew up that way too. So your kids, did you raise them in an environment where they were tempted by that type of stuff? If so, what was your style with them to keep them away from that? And as someone who prioritizes getting married young, and I'm an advocate of that too. I've been with my wife since I was 17. I became Muslim when I was 22, but we got married then. But we've been together 22 years. I've been with her since I was 17. There, I mean, so much of this comes down to getting kids to appreciate the long-term benefit of things.
Yes.
Family.
Yes.
Some things I will say to kids actually while I'm on this. Ask them to think about old people. Ask them to think about, the people okay, just take the peers How many of them are talking about, hey, let's go visit some old people today? Let's go visit someone's grandma or something like that. No one's talking about that. People don't prioritize going to visit old people. So when someone's old, who do you think does prioritize visiting them? They're, obviously there's their children or their grandchildren.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a family and you don't have that investment, you will be towards the end of your life and you will find that you are all alone. And that's just the reality. Another thing, I do have a video, actually the last video I posted was on this last live stream I did. With in Surah Al-Rum, verses 20 to 25. All 5 of those verses are verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is delineating his signs. And one of the signs that he delineates is giving us spouses who we can dwell in tranquility with and between whom he has put love and mercy. There is a similar verse in Surah Al-Araf where that tranquility is connected to producing children, righteous children from whom the believers are thankful for. So marriage, the love, mercy, and experience that comes with that, the gratitude of that, the depth to it, this is one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has delineated as one of his signs in his book. And it's one of the things that he delineated in such a way that is dependent on your interaction with other people. Not all the signs that he delineates are that way. The alternation of night and day, the bringing forth vegetation when the rain comes, anyone can observe those things.
Yeah.
But the sign that he lists that involves your interaction with one another, with another person, is marriage. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ said that marriage completes half of your religion. And that ayat, to me, it brings a whole new depth to it. So, we have to say to kids, like, you don't want to miss out on your life. The depth of experiencing this great sign of Allah that he delineated in his book, and that you can only experience through getting married to someone. Because, we have to constantly be trying to impart upon kids that life is a series of choices, and the best choices are ones where it's delayed gratification, where you sacrifice short-term gain and stimulation for deeper long-term benefits. And in developed cultures, post-industrial cultures, the reality is we have this prolonged childhood that they call adolescence. So the culture and the society will not force you to make the decision to grow up. But
No,
the people,
you're right. Yep.
but the people who make an intentional decision to grow up sooner, they are going to experience the more long-term benefit in life. And we can see that just by what we're reflecting upon and by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in his book. So I'm sorry, I wanted to get back to those questions I asked you. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your own experience raising your kids and this idea of getting them to want to get married younger. And not be so responsibility averse. This is the big thing. Even some non-Muslim surveyors of the current generation, and I even saw it in my generation growing up in America, they associate marriage with responsibility. And I do sympathize with young sisters. They still think of the idea of when they get married, it's something they're going to have to like wholly devote to. So, and that sounds intimidating to them. So, and then I think about me and my wife having gotten together when we were 17 before Islam, and we were together at that time. Then we moved in together when we were 19, lived together, all that type of stuff. So it was like this more gradual buildup. And to a part of the reason I wanted to bring someone else to this conversation too is, when I get asked about marriage advice with Muslims, the whole culture of it is honestly rather foreign to me. because
Yeah, that's not your experience.
yeah,
Yeah,
the whole courting thing, and it's kind of,
mm,
I mean, I've even had brothers be like, "Hey, do you know any, I was in Saudi, like, do you know any sisters back home? Because I have a younger brother. Here's his, like, literally, here's his CV for
yeah,
marriage."
we do that. That's what we
I
do.
know
We
that,
have marriage CVs.
that whole type of thing is, it comes with a lot of pressure, it seems to me, So that's something I'm curious about. Like, have you done with your kids, and how do we get kids and parents to buy into the idea of, maybe we accommodate a more gradual experience for the younger people,
Mm,
where,
mm, mm.
maybe they can get married at 17 and they don't have to live together. They can live
Yeah.
together in a couple years. And then even when they start living together, maybe they're both going to school and they have to understand that they're supporting each other through this type of thing.
If we could find spouses for our kids, that's the best option, in my opinion. And certainly, I think, I mean, I'm not going to uh, say this as in I've got it all figured out. I think that we raised our children to the very best of our ability within the Muslim space. We were in a Muslim community when we lived in England, and then we moved to Egypt, and our kids were always in Islamic school and always memorized Quran, etc. But I think most parents and there were many of us who did that. I think most parents who have done that or are doing that will recognize that at a certain point, your child is going to interact with the world, and your child is either going to interact with the world and make it, or they're going to get waylaid, basically, right? But I think what I would say with my children is that I made it a practice for the last few years to talk about being married. My children lost their father about 6 or 7 years ago, Allah yarhamu.
Right.
So
Mercy on him.
my older children experienced that marriage. It was a 17-year marriage, alhamdulillah. So my older boys, they remember it, right? So they have their father as a role model when it comes to being a husband and father, like they get it. My daughters were born sort of nearer the end of his life, so they didn't see as much. But I talked to them a lot about how we got together and why. And we were both reverts, alhamdulillah, and we were introduced by a mutual friend. And I'm so grateful now, especially in the current cultural context. I'm so grateful that I got married at 22, right? I got married in my final year of university, and alhamdulillah, this is what I say to young sisters. I was able to get my degree, alhamdulillah. I got married, and I started a family. I think I had a baby, my first baby, the year after. Alhamdulillah, 5 children, mashallah. In between those 5 children, and being a very, very present and active mother throughout their young years, homeschooling at certain points and all of that, I was writing my books. I was doing my little thing on the side, right? And now my eldest is 23, right? My youngest is 11. And I'm so grateful that I didn't get waylaid while I was at university with the idea of building my career first. Because, obviously this is something that people are talking about a lot nowadays, right? But I'd like to share this here in case it's useful to anybody. I had a chat with some young ladies who, my good friend from the same generation as me, she brought them and she said, talk to them. They don't want to get married. Like, what am I going to do with them? Try and put some sense into them, right? So these are some beautiful young girls, mashallah, raised in a Muslim household, practicing Muslim household, lovely girls. They got their degrees, they started working. And the thing is, the life that you can have nowadays compared to, a home, you've got money, you're working. There's a lot more freedom than there used to be. So girls are going out, to eat, to brunch, to lunch, they may travel, they've got their girlfriends, they've got the Instagram life, right?
Yeah.
So they said to me, we're enjoying our lives right now. Like, I've got the best of everything. I live at home, so my mom takes care of everything and I don't have to pay rent. I'm making money in my job. I've got fantastic friends. I have a great life. Like, why would I give this up in order to get married? And I said to her, okay, say you use the next 5 to 10 years of your life living it up like you're doing now, right? very few responsibilities, having loads of fun, loads of memories, all this, the memories, your Instagram is popping because you're going here, you're going there, and you're traveling, and you're having all this, you kind of go up the career ladder, you make even more money, you may even buy a house, you do all of that stuff. Great. Bravo, alayki. Well done. Now you're 32. You think you may want to find someone now. In fact, you want to find someone now, because in the back of your mind, even now, you do want to have a family, right? But if you put it off for the next 5 to 10 years, you need to understand that you have you're mislaying your investment. Right now, you have time and youth on your side. You have everything on your side right now. In order for you to find a good person, the best type of person, the one that you want, and start investing in your future, your real future, the future that you're even thinking about now. Because it's not like these girls were saying we never want to get married. They were just saying we don't want to get married now, right? But I said, but look, if you invest the next 10 years of your life in having fun, you are no way closer to your goal of getting married. In fact, you are further away. And I want to make this really, really clear. You are further away from your initially stated goal, which was to have a family of your own. Why are you further away? Because you're not that young and cute anymore. Yeah. You have likely priced yourself out of the market, because you know how women in general, they want somebody on their level who makes the same amount as them or more, etc., etc. You've become pickier. You become pickier, right? Your standards are much, much higher. You yourself as a person are much more rigid, okay, yeah. And less likely.
That's a huge thing, actually.
Yes, less likely less likely, let's say, to accommodate. All right, less likely to settle, less likely to compromise, and definitely less likely to submit. Because you're a big woman now, right? And you've lived your whole life, and who's going to tell you what to do? So I said, so now you're at 32. Not only that, you have to look at fertility. Fertility is a real thing. Yeah. If you wanted to have a big family, doing this at 32 is not the plan, is not a good idea, right? And the reality is, brothers who are serious about having big families, they get married younger. Yeah. So you may find that those brothers who were serious, who wanted to get married, wanted to have a family, they wanted to settle down, they knocked for you when you were 24, but you were too busy living your best life, and he went and married somebody else. And now when you get to 32, you've got the divorcees, mashallah, the ones who've been messing around throughout their 20s, okay? Or the man children who basically are not even ready even at that age, right? And then there is a real bias in that brothers would prefer not to marry a sister who is older, who's been in her career all this time, because it's just that much harder to settle down and have a family. Yeah. These are real things that, my young sisters, I need you to hear on this, okay? So for me, I'm very open about these things with my kids, right? So alhamdulillah, and this is, by the fadl of Allah, really, both my daughters are very excited about the idea of being married and being mums. They know what they want to do with their education. They know why they want to do what they want to do with their education. But they both realize that if I want to secure the kind of life that my mum had, inshallah, because obviously everything is, it's in the hands of Allah, I cannot leave getting married to chance. Yeah. And I say this to people all the time, is that, people, kind of mock the idea of preparing to be a wife. They mock the idea of investing in you being a wife, right? Or even making a plan to become a wife. They mock that idea. But the point is, we invest in everything else. We plan everything else. And we are prepared to suffer and sacrifice for all our other goals. But we expect marriage to just fall in our lap. And not only that, very specifically, and I want to say this for brothers and sisters, we expect the ability to be a wife to be innate. And we also expect in a man that he should just know how to be a husband, right? You're supposed to know that, right? Many sisters nowadays, we don't know how to be wives. And I will say even some brothers in some areas, they don't know how to be husbands, okay? I would say that the brothers have, I think, and I could be wrong, please correct me if I am, the sisters will not let the brothers forget that they have a responsibility when it comes to the money piece, right? They will not allow them to forget that they have the responsibility when it comes to providing for the family. So the brothers know that. They do know that. But on the flip side, I don't think that sisters in general are, we would never like, how can I put this in a delicate way? A sister today probably believes that she's wife material because she prays and she's pretty, she's good looking, or she's a lovely person, right? Let's put it that way. She's a lovely person. So why wouldn't you want to marry her, right? All my friends love me. I've achieved so much in my life. You know, I've raised this much for charity. I have a master's. I have, you know, this career. You know, my co-workers love me. Of course you want to marry me. Because sisters nowadays do not really respect the art of being a wife, which is not the same as being a boss babe. It's not the same as being a student. It's not the same as being any of those other roles. It is not the same. And I think, you know, because culturally it's taboo now to tell women anything, especially to tell women about being submissive, about, you know, just like chilling, just like sitting down, taking a seat, letting him lead, you know, allowing somebody else to take care of you, allowing someone to be responsible for you. We can't, it's culturally taboo now. You cannot tell sisters, sometimes you just need to, it's good. You don't have to have the last word. You don't have to win every argument. You don't have to prove yourself constantly. And that's the feminism coming out, right? That's the feminist, the feminist programming that is it's in the air. And I know so many sisters in my generation and kind of the next generation who, if you ask them, are you a feminist? They'll say, no, I'm not really. Nah, who cares? Because ideologically, it's not that cool to be a feminist, right? But if you hear what they think is suitable female behavior, or the way that a woman should be with her spouse or with her husband, you realize that, oh, okay, you have drunk the feminist Kool-Aid. And you really do think that the way that a wife is described in the Quran and Sunnah, that is degrading, that is insulting, that is sexist, that is chauvinist. So that's what I mean about the unlearning. So yeah.
You know, when it comes to convincing, you know, and also to another thing I tell parents, it's important to, you know, like a young person in their early 20s, it's hard to convince anyone about that they should do something very different right now, you know. And you have to have conversations with the kids actually before they get to that stage in life. So that way you project onto them how they should look at things and how they should think about things once they arrive there. And also project onto them and give them the ability to see the mistakes that others will make. You know, a very important thing, what you said about it's harder to learn in your 30s. Like it's harder to adopt new habits in your 30s. And there is a neurological basis to this. You know, the mind is less flexible once you get into the late 20s, and it really stiffens up when you get to the 30s and 40s. And people in their 30s and 40s, they're very, very attached to whatever their life habits and routines are. And if you start a family at that age, you have kids beginning in that age, you've shaken up your whole life. And, you know, like learning to be a spouse, you want to learn beforehand. I think too, it can be a trap though, also into like thinking you need to over prepare, both for marriage and having kids. And there is a reality to both those relationships, spouse or parents, that there's going to be on the job learning. You are going to be more frustrated with that on the job learning doing it in your 30s and 40s than doing it in your 20s, because your mind is less flexible. Just look at sleeping patterns. You know, when you have a baby, it disrupts your sleep, period. You know, any older person can tell you, when you're in your 20s, you can run sometimes on 2-3 hours of sleep. You can wake up in the middle of the night, you can get up early and go or whatever. You can get through it. Teenagers are actually great at it. They do it all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
By the time you're 35, you whatever your sleep schedule is, you need it. And you're going to feel like sick if you don't get it. And, Muslim parents too, they need to use the mistakes of the West and kind of explain it to kids, because the material success of Western people, it hides their interpersonal suffering a lot, and white culture too. It's not a very extroverted culture, so their suffering, they keep it all very internal, and if you don't have an inside view on it, you can get fooled. And what you see going on in the West now, certainly in America, with my generation, actually the Gen X generation too, a lot of them, they waited till their 30s, even their 40s sometimes, especially if they're higher socioeconomic status, to have kids. And those kids raised by parents like that, even if they're wealthy, they are growing up with all of these issues, all these mental health issues, because their parents are not actually parenting them. Like in America, their parents export parenting their kids to extracurricular activities. That's what higher socioeconomic status parents do in the West. They have them in basketball on Monday, this, that, whatever clubs 5 days a week. So you always get them somewhere else, and then you're not actually parenting. And these kids, they're growing up like not really connected to anybody. So there's a huge pitfall there.
I want to say this. Can I just jump in? Do you mind if I just jump in here? Because I read something really interesting about how children who come later on in life, right? If you have your first child at 35, for example, chances are you're going to have a smaller family, right? Statistically, because you just, fertility is down, and also, your window is smaller. So you'll have a smaller family. But also what tends to happen is the parenting style is a very anxious parenting style, because it's your one child, or it's just two children. And so this is almost like the opposite of what you're saying, which is where there's not much parenting happening. It's almost like there is an overinvestment in parenting and in who the children are and how they are and how happy they are. And I remember reading and thinking, so does that mean that if you have 5 kids, you can afford to be a bit more lax? But I know that from child number 3 onwards, my parenting style was quite different, because it had to be, right? But if you've got resources and you've got time and you've only have one child, that child is going to grow up with a very different sense of self than one of 5 kids, right? We see this all the time. And people may say, well, that's a good thing. The child feels important, significant, but actually it leads to a lot of problems. It actually leads to a lot of problems with regards to parenting, with regards to authority, because those parents don't want their child to be angry with them. They don't want their child to be upset. This is their one chance, and they want to get everything right. And even that leads them to make parenting decisions that ultimately are not in the best interests of the child, right? Because maybe the child, has this entitlement, or they're super spoiled, or they take their parents for granted. They believe the world revolves around them, because it does, right? In their home, that is, their parents' world revolves around them. So that's another interesting point as well, that if Muslims follow the trends from the general culture, we are going to see those types of issues as well. And maybe we already do, subhanAllah.
Yeah, absolutely. SubhanAllah. So can I ask you?
You asked a question about the, sorry, I want to make sure we answer the question about the early marriage. So I think, because we've been going all over the place with our conversation today, so I apologize for that. But having the conversations, as a normal part of life early on. So not having a situation where your child dare not speak about marriage, because there are some cultures that, the kids are not allowed to say anything about marriage, because the parents would think that, oh, you've been reading something, you've been watching something, like what's going on? Normalizing conversations about marriage, about being a spouse, husband or wife, and also preparing them with the skills that they will need for running a home, for running a family, right? So giving them responsibility early on, I think, is a good thing. Teaching them how to do the things they're going to need to do, getting them confident and proficient in those skills. And then I like the idea of looking out within your community for potentials. From when your kids are in their mid to late teens, be looking for potentials. I put the word out there. I said, my kid, hey, listen, find me someone, like we'll be looking in a few years or whatever.
Question, you do that, your child's like 14, 15. What do you do when your child expresses anxiety about the fact that you're doing that?
I wouldn't do it if my child was like, "Mom, please don't ever." That doesn't make sense, because the last thing we're gonna do is force our child to get married, right? That's stuff that
Well,
happens in
okay,
movies.
but like let's say you're not. I mean, you're not thinking about them getting married 14 to 15, but by the time if let's say they're 14, 15, like I think that's a good age to start doing what you're saying. Like you think about people in the community where there can be some connections made, and you can maybe help facilitate something. Now, again, of course, not forcing them to get married, but like arranging for them to get to know someone or whatever. And a child who's 13, 14 might be like about that. But as an adult, when they're 18, 19, they're gonna feel very differently about it.
Yes.
And then if you're not planting those seeds at 14, 15 in the community, you might not be able to facilitate it as well when you're 18, 19.
Yeah.
So I mean,
absolutely.
yeah.
I think I think what you're saying is very much the case, is that I think, children are different. And I think nowadays, 13, 14, unfortunately, is not as young as it was a generation or two ago. I think that they are, a lot of 13, 14-year-olds are very exposed to all sorts of stuff.
Being exposed doesn't necessarily mean it definitely doesn't mean they're more mature, though.
Oh, no, just exposed. That's why I use the word exposed. But I think, for me personally, it's not even a case of the child knowing who I'm looking at, but I am looking. I am looking, and I'm seeing who's out there and whose child is growing and how they're growing, etc. And I do think certainly my wish would be that my children are ready at a certain age, and if we find someone or they find someone, that we can facilitate for them to do nikah. And maybe, like you said, they're at school or they're still living at home and they have their halal dating. I think that, especially for girls, I think it's a really important stage. And I say especially for girls because I think it is, I think regardless of, what we think of Hollywood and all of that, I think that there is something to be said for winning a girl's heart, right? For falling in love. And I think that if you can fall in love with your husband and the compatibility has been established already, I think even as a young wife coming in, to have those feelings, it just makes everything so much easier. I don't think that this generation of girls is going to cope with being married to a guy that they do not have any feelings for. I just don't. They're not made that way. They're just not made that way. Maybe none of us are or were. I don't know. But I think facilitating that and making it like an open door. So if there is someone, tell us who it is, and we'll see if we can have a conversation with the parents. But it needs to be something, I think, that's part of the family dynamic. That and my family, we talk about it a lot, and more so than in other families, I think, I've heard from my friends. But it's because I know that I would like for them to be ready earlier rather than later. And I would love for them to find somebody and to settle down earlier rather than later, so they can start on this journey. And like I was saying to the young girl, if you marry at 21, 22, and you spend the next 10 years of your life investing in your marriage and your family, where you are at 31 or 35, yes, you may not have made partner. You may not have reached whatever level in the office, right? You may not have your master's yet, but you have something so much more valuable, so much more meaningful, and so much more real and tangible and lasting than just a career and an amazing Instagram feed, right? Which is how I see it, to be honest. And you've invested in your long-term future, like you said. It's the short-term sacrifice, the short-term work, which is joyful work. Right? It's not that it's dreadful the whole way and then you get to enjoy in 20 years' time. No, it's amazing, right? Being a mom is amazing. Being married is amazing, right? And I would love for them to experience that, and then inshallah reap the benefits. And then if, after 5 years, 6 years or whatever, you want to go and get another degree, you want to get a master's, you want to start your career, no problem. Go and do that.
Absolutely.
You have that.
It'll actually be easier, and you'll have so much more wisdom and insight when you are doing that.
Much better. Also, and you'll be much clearer on what you want to do.
Yeah. Also too, that age 22, 23, like you're saying about the Instagram feed, it's very, very stimulating to them still at that age, but they don't realize how they're really just 3-4 years away from that not really doing it for them anymore. And you're going to want something deeper in life. And again, there's neurological reasons why that takes place. You don't experience, once your brain is fully developed, prefrontal cortex, all that type of stuff, you don't experience fun the same way that you did before. And kids
Yeah.
need to understand this from a young age. It's hard for
Yeah.
them to see it and appreciate it, but they can be taught this. And what you're more looking for when you're older is these deeper things that give you a sense of life satisfaction. Look, while we're still going on the pre-marriage stuff, I have a few things from my members I got to get asked. So
Okay.
one asked, what would you advise a sister to look for in a brother as far as whether or not he's going to be a good parent if you're meeting some of this type of thing? And
I think one of the things that is important for everyone to do, for themselves and for a potential, is to look at the home you came from, right? Because that's where it all begins. The home you came from.
Yeah.
What kind of home did he come from? Did she come from? Right? What were the roles? What was the environment? What was the atmosphere? What was discipline like? What was emphasized? What was de-emphasized? All of that. Once you're serious with someone, you really want to find out, okay, well, firstly, what is this person's blueprint? What do they understand from the blueprint? What have they taken from it? Because they could have come from a very toxic situation and, like you said, made the decision to do things completely differently. Or they may not even recognize that it is a toxic situation and that may be their normal, in which case you need to ask yourself, am I okay with that? Right? Can I deal with that situation? Probably not. Right? But definitely finding out more about how they grew up and their observations on how they grew up, how their dad was with their mom, vice versa. Right? That's really important. And then the person themselves, how much thought have they given to parenting? Do they think about it at all? Right? What is their understanding of a father's role? Have they read any books, listened to any podcasts? Are they in any way growing in that area, or is that something they expect to learn later? It's not a judgment, it's just knowing, right? This guy, he doesn't really get it. He just thinks that, we're gonna have this baby and I'm gonna look after it and he's just gonna bring home the bread, which is fine. And if that's your understanding as well, then that's also fine. But at least this is how he's going in. So it's about being intentional. And if he hasn't thought about it before, invite him to think about it. Have those conversations up front, please. Arjukum, have the conversations up front, right? And you may think, okay, but there's so much there's so many other things to talk about, and I get that. But this is really crucial. And you may find that because of his environment, he hasn't given it much thought. Let him give it some thought. He should give it some thought so that you guys can actually have a conversation where you both are bringing something to the table and you can decide, are we on the same page? Is there some difference that we need to discuss? Like what are we actually doing here? And realize, I want to say this as well, realize that once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you with children, they are amana. And I want to say this in the kindest way possible, but they are the priority. They should be your priority. So, becoming parents, you're bound together for life, right? So the first thing is choose somebody that you are okay to be bound together for life with, right? So that if Allah blesses you with children, then it's not a deal breaker, right? But also understand that there is value. I'm sorry, and people can come for me for this, but there is value in making it work for the sake of the kids. I want people to stop saying, don't say for the sake of the kids. Would you rather have, your kids see you guys like killing each other, or rather than to be, happy, healthy, and free, and you as a single mom? Stop doing that. Stop doing that, because that is not always the case, right? That's not always the case. And this is this whole individual, authentic me, kind of living my truth and all of this stuff that I feel is, I just think it's really damaging. Because if you are your priority all the time, and women, especially sisters, women in general, we are the ones who are being given this messaging more than anybody else, I think. In fact, we are the ones being given this messaging. You are the most important thing. Your happiness is the most important thing. Your truth and your being, etc., is the most important thing. And everything else, if it's not serving you, then you need to leave, or you need to let it go, or all of this kind of thing. And no one has been able to convince me yet that is not a toxic narrative when it comes to families.
SubhanAllah.
Because I'm sorry, it's not about you. You've got these children, right? And these children require certain things. And it's not always the case that, and this is another thing as well. I've mentioned this in some of our podcasts. When a woman is in her feelings and she's not happy with her husband, and we're not talking about abuse here, we're just talking about not being happy, right? She's not happy with her husband. Social media probably feed into that. She's listening to people, she's watching people that are feeding into this sense of dissatisfaction that she has. Sometimes she can't even place the dissatisfaction, but it's there, right? And we've all been there, okay? We've all been there in moments where we just think, you know what, I would rather not be here. Fine, fair enough. I think what is worth remembering in these moments is, what is this all for? What is this about, right? Because if your lens is all about yourself, you will make decisions that harm your children and that jeopardize and sabotage your own future, right? Because as I've said before, in the short term, it may be a relief to kick him out because he's doing your head in, he's annoying you, right? He's annoying you, he doesn't understand you, he doesn't listen to you, you don't feel seen by him, he doesn't appreciate you, all of this stuff, right? So you get rid of him. In the short term, you feel the euphoria because you're free. Wonderful. I don't have to worry about him anymore. I don't have his negative energy anymore. I don't have him in my ear anymore and all of this stuff, right? Not, completely oblivious to the fact that you've destroyed a home and that your children miss their father and they miss their mother and father together, that likely your in-laws miss you and the kids, likely your husband is destroyed because he does not have his wife and children anymore, right? Sure. And it will not be long before you too feel that regret, because being a single mom is not nice. It's not fun. It's actually a very difficult job.
Wow.
We're not built to be on our own, raising our children as a woman, etc., right? We were not built that way, right?
And since your husband passed, you have been a single mother, is that correct?
No, I've been married. I've been married in the interim, yes, alhamdulillah.
Okay. But raise a child without their family there.
Yes, but now I am the sole person, and subhanallah, the only reason that I haven't lost my mind is because the children's father left them with an inheritance.
Sure.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. But I know sisters who don't, the husband, he's dead or alive or whatever the case may be, but financially they are responsible. And it is an extremely stressful situation. It is an extremely heavy burden, right? And at the end of the day, it's...
I'll just say, I teach in the inner city, and, I see so many kids in general, like boys who are being raised by single mothers who are having to do it all, and the stress is getting to them. They're just some of the highest at-risk kids.
Yes, they are. And statistically, the statistics show really how children raised by single mothers in particular fare on every level, right? And how that they are at a disadvantage at every level. So all I'm saying is, Muslims at one point had a complete anti-divorce, divorce stigma culture. We had that at one point. Sure. I fear that we're swinging to the other extreme, where divorce is celebrated, where divorce is considered a liberation, and oh, he deserved it, and oh, sis, don't worry, you'll get someone who deserves you, which is very much the cultural climate at the moment. And that's why I speak about it so much, because nobody goes online to talk about their divorce regret. Sisters don't do that. They go on to talk about how my divorce was good for me, my divorce was the best thing that happened to me. You have all of those stories, but the sisters who regret it, they don't speak because it's shameful. Yeah. The sisters who can see the damage that the divorce has had on their children, they don't talk about it publicly. That's shameful. That is an embarrassing thing to say, especially if you instigated the divorce. The sisters who have married after the divorce and the marriage didn't last, and then they married somebody else, and it's just a complete, disaster area. They don't talk about that online because it's embarrassing. But that's what's happening. That is what's happening. And I've seen how often people have jettisoned that initial marriage where the children were born, etc., just jettisoned it or just given up on it for whatever reason. Yeah, whether it was a really important reason or not, I'm not judging. I'm just saying that they let it go, right? And they said, I can't do this anymore, I'm done. And they let that marriage go, thinking there was something better out there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be the one to bring it to people's attention, but the rate of divorce in second and subsequent marriages are higher and higher and higher the more you go, because there is less stability, there is less holding you together, and there is just more of a, you know what, I'll just move on type of mentality, right? And if anybody thinks that multiple marriages are good for the kids or good for the wife or even good for these men, they'll need to come with some proofs and some evidences, because statistically it's not looking good. So people need to be aware of that as well. Yeah.
I have a lot to say. First of all, I think it's a wonderful advice what you said that I didn't think about asking a brother about his own reflections on his own upbringing and talking about how, two potential spouses like that, talking, having good conversation about how we were raised and both gauging and prompting for more of the extent to which someone has reflected on that. I think that is really good advice. Really good advice. And it's a lot better than like these kind of checklist things or whatever that people have, all that type of stuff, which like
can I just say about this? Can I just say about this checklist thing, right? And this is the crazy thing. As a parent, most of us, we've done our best. Yeah. We've done our best. Okay. We're trying and we're doing our best. We've tried to raise good kids. We've tried to have a decent home, no matter what kind of tests we've been through, right? When we do checklists, this is what it looks like. Is there a divorce in the family? Oh, there's a divorce. Is the father working and earning a certain amount? Oh, he's not. Are all the children practicing and praying 5 times in the masjid? No. Oh, has there been any divorce amongst the siblings? Oh no. Is the eldest one married? No, you know what I'm saying? Like that type of selective criteria that may be worked at one point in time in certain cultures, I just don't think it's relevant anymore, because there will be something in your family that you lost control of. And I'm saying this really, and Allah knows, I'm sure there's no one here that can say my family is perfect. My family is perfect, and I will not marry my daughter or my son to anybody whose family is not perfect. If the parents are not together, it's a no. Oh, really? But what happened? Why are they not together? Did the husband die? Did the wife die? Were there issues involved that were, genuine issues? There was violence or whatever. And if that's the case, you're going to say no to that kid? I just think that our options now mean that we have to be a lot more reflective when we are judging families, right? Because as you know, many amazing brothers and sisters came from families that they were not Muslim, or that didn't practice, or that drank alcohol, and had parties, drugs and all that kind of thing, right? You may find that that's the case now. So like, I agree with you. I think this checklist thing is not helpful, but definitely being circumspect and taking into account the impact of the family dynamics. It's not the family dynamic that's the most important thing. It's how did the family dynamic impact this kid who's coming to ask for my daughter, right? How did it impact him? So if his father left at 5, when he was 5 years old, somebody could say, oh, no, he grew up without a father. Khalas, yani, no, we don't want that kind of boy here. We want someone who X, Y, Z. But no, what was the impact of that on him and his siblings and his whole family dynamic? It could have scarred him for life. He could have unresolved trauma, or he could have had the trauma, worked through it, and come out the other side with an understanding of what it means to be a father and a husband that you agree with. You know, that makes sense to you. You know what I mean? If someone has a brother or a sister who's left the deen, for example, are you really going to look at the parents and say, no, this is not a good family because one of the children doesn't practice? We know how easy it is to lose kids to the dunya. We know, and we know some of the most practicing parents, right? You'll see mashallah, a brother and a sister. We know this. They've got ilm, they've done all the things right. Next thing you know, they're not together anymore. Next thing you know, one of the children's gone off the deen. Do you know what I'm saying? So I really think it's more about looking at the impact and being clear on what you can tolerate.
Yeah.
Because there are some things that you are going to say, that is a line for me. No, we're not going to tolerate that. Okay. And there'll be a line for me as well. I think everybody should have a line. There's certain things that, no, we as a family, we can't tolerate this, but there also will be things that you can tolerate, you know, that you can understand and you can extend grace to. And I think it's just has to be a lot more nuanced, you know, than it was in the past, I think.
Yeah. I completely agree, you know, and it's really a great conversation just to I think gauge someone's mentality, you know, and even if, you know, and their ability to be introspective and reflect. And even if they don't have that, by doing what you said, like asking them to do it more, you can, you know, even if it doesn't work out with that person that is courting you or whatever, you know, you can do something beneficial for them by prompting them to do that. You know, I would say to that, I want to say a couple of things. One, just another bit of advice on that. It's a question of gauging a brother on whether or not he'll be a good parent. And also just too, because like I want to say something on the benefits of being with someone for a long time. Because even though I'm only 39, I have been with my wife since I was 22. But you know, firstly, with one thing I would say to the sister who asked that question, you know, does the brother want to have kids soon, like right away after getting married? Married is something I would say. And maybe even you don't, but but a thing that I like about the idea of a brother who wants to get into it, you know, especially if he's younger, actually, you know, even if he doesn't have the best job or whatever, it says something about his belief in the qadr of Allah, because and because Allah is ar-Razzaq. And you know, and we really can't forget that the provision for the children, the provision for the family does come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not that we don't do everything by our own means to provide for it, we do, but you know, like you know, younger brother who he wants to get married, but I want to wait 4 or 5 years or something to have kids. There's something about that doesn't sit right with me personally. Like, so that's just another thing I would say. I want to say,
is that your line?
Huh?
Would that be a line for you where you would say if a young man came and he said,
I mean, like I have 3 daughters, so if one of my daughters is me with a brother, you know, and he's like, well, I want to wait, you know, maybe 1 year, okay, but like several years before having kids, I don't like the idea of that. And I myself, you know, me and my wife had our first child. I wasn't done with school yet. Was making pizzas when we had our first child, you know, and I was a few years into it, or not a few years, like I was new to Islam then, and she wasn't Muslim yet. And I remember all the Muslim families asking if we got all our shopping done before the baby was born. And I'm like shopping. We don't have a crib, you know. Like we you know, we don't have like the idea like you have everything set up before the baby's born. And you know, and I think I've had the experience. Lots of people have had the experience. Only the more kids you have, the more Allah increases your risk. That happens very frequently, you know. And you know, you have to put in your full effort, but you shouldn't fear that. You shouldn't fear it, you know. So that's the one thing I'd say. You know, I'd just like to say, like, you know, staying with someone for a long time, it takes work. It's not easy. There's benefit to working through hard things. Everyone has to work through hard things. I'll say from a brother's perspective, and I think this will transition to some other questions I have. I hope you're willing to go for at least a little bit longer. You know, like my wife and I, we've known each other since we were young. You know, we were first in a class together in 8th grade when we were 13. Got together when we were 17. You know,
wow, mashallah,
yeah. So we've seen each other grow a lot. You know, and we got married after I became Muslim. It took 10 years for her to become Muslim after that, you know. And you know, so we still have some like religious differences in that it's hard for her to adopt everything because she's just not a quick adopter like that. You know, not every person's personality is built towards that. But I learned a great lesson of patience for that. You know, we lived in Jeddah for 3 years. I'd make Umrah every other weekend and go in front of the Kaaba and make dua for her to become Muslim. And there were times where I was making that dua and it felt like things were going in the reverse direction, but it did end up happening, you know. So you will learn lessons of sabr by sticking with things. You know, and now with my wife, and neither of us come from, you know, our parents were all baby boomers. So, you know, they were influenced, first generation really influenced on masculine and stuff. I come from a family where my mother was the more dominant figure, that type of thing. So I don't come to my marriage with any type of cultural impression, you know, about like, you know, and to say like what you were saying about the sisters getting this messaging about it being all about them. I do think there's somewhat of an entitlement issue with many Muslim men. I do think that is an issue. And, and you know, like yes, you are the authority and you are the leader of the household and you have the final say as a man. Islam gives you that right. But it's just a reality. You're not going to grow up. You're not going to be married in a cultural milieu where that is just going to be a given and that is going to be reinforced. So for a long time when the Muslim societies were more enclosed, you know, men might have been existing in a way where they will get compliance from the spouse, whether they are sensitive about it, whether they are emotionally intelligent about it or whatever, they're going to get that compliance just because there is no social incentive whatsoever for the wife to go against that. That's not the reality now. That is simply not the reality. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said that Hawa was created from Adam's rib. One was created from Adam's rib. So if you try to straighten it, you will break her. So be kind to women. You know, any man who intakes that hadith knows the wisdom behind that if you've had experience with women. And men tend to like to think about things in a direct manner. We will deal with each other in a very direct manner. And young men out there who are getting into relationships and marriages for the first time, you know, they have to realize that you are going to have to learn a different way to deal with. You're going to have to learn that. And you need to have emotional control, like I was saying, to really be a leader that someone is going to buy into. So I think that is the responsibility on the Muslim males these days. That brothers, they can't have this, you know, sense of entitlement. And you know, you always control yourself. Yourself is always what you have control over. And I do think the whole echo chamber effect of you know, and the way the West induces gender wars upon people. You know, it's negative to this aspect because it makes people like they have this almost like false hope that if we just rail against the other gender long enough, then we're going to wake up tomorrow and something's going to switch. Like nothing is going to switch. The dynamics between genders are. It is not going to switch. And yourself is what you have control over. I want to say like a benefit that, you know, like the getting into middle age now, like the benefits that I experienced from having committed and being with someone for a very long time. I mean, it's hard to even explain, but you know, my wife now, I mean, she knows when I need a cup of coffee without me even having to say when I need a cup of coffee. You know, she knows when she knows when I need tea versus coffee without me even having to say anything. She knows what kind of meal I'm going to be in the mood for. You know, she knows where I am in my digestive side, all this type of stuff before I even need to say anything. And that just comes from being together for so long. And there's benefits to that you can't even articulate. And for us, that didn't come out, you know, like she's a very submissive wife. And she, you know, she's very, even though she's from the West, she had more of a personality disposition that is suited towards being domesticated like that, you know. So like, you know, she gets satisfaction out of that type of thing and it all runs very smoothly. And it's not something that you can just fire up with someone right away if you're switching from one relationship to another. Like the only way it can happen. And me as well, you know, I know her emotional, I know all kinds of things about what she's feeling and thinking and, you know, when she needs a hug, when I need to approach something in a certain type of way, you know, just by subtleties about her, just by having a sense of her vibes and that experience, again, you can only experience it by experiencing it, which means committing to someone and being with someone for a long time.
I agree. And it reminds me of a couple that I've had on my channel, you know, a few times now, Mariam Lemo and Said Takuma. And I think They are celebrating 30 something years now, mashallah.
Masha.
And I love, you know, the red flags that their relationship presented at the beginning, because she was 18
Yeah.
and he was he in his late 20s or maybe even 30, but he was significantly older than her. So nowadays you would say that's a red flag, but they got married when she was 18. He was maybe approaching 30. I have to get the right number, but he was a lot older than her. She asked for divorce in the second week, and she said,
Whoa.
take me back to my house. I can't do this. And he refused at the time, but they, as the way they tell the story, they fought for 7 years. 7 years of hell at the beginning of their relationship, where they didn't have kids because they were like, this situation is too volatile. You know, like we cannot bring kids into this situation. But they fought and argued and tussled and went back and forth for 7 years before she started to listen and he started to speak. And from that time on, when you hear them talk about it, from that time on, that's when their relationship was able to flourish. They now have 2 boys, grown adults, mashallah, left home, everything. But and then here they are to live to tell the tale. But why I love that story is, like you said, if you stick with it, inshallah,
Yeah.
Allah will give you the tawfiq. If you stick through the tough times, Allah will bring the fruits, inshallah, of your patience. And it's sad to me that a lot of couples will never taste the fruits of, because they were not patient, you know. So if you bail out of the marriage after 3 years or 5 years or even 10 years, and you've got 3, 4 kids, and you bail at that point, you're never going to have that happily ever after. You're never going to have that situation where, you know, you both see your children get married, you know, you're both there as a team, you know, when the rishta comes, or whatever they call it, you know, to come and ask for your daughter's hand. You know, you're never going to both be there to welcome your first grandchild. Like, that future is done for you. You know, and who knows? Of course, people remarry, they have more children, they do all of that, but you've lost what you could have had now. Obviously, qadar Allah, but you don't know what is possible, right? At the time when you're going through those difficulties and you're just saying, you know what, I think it would be better if it would be easier if we just, you know, go our separate ways, right? If you take that decision, okay, but you know, that means you're saying no to the happily ever after that you maybe could have had with this person. I don't know. It's just something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing is, like, when you get through those hard times, I mean, to have 7 years of hard times or 7 years of arguing, but then to have gotten through it, you know, the appreciation that you will have for that other person now, it's something you just can't duplicate it anywhere else, you know?
Absolutely, mashallah.
Okay, sister, I want to ask, so I've talked about like the emotional control thing. You talked about the men oftentimes going from a place of anger, this type of thing. So I've had mothers ask me about, you know, they've been consuming my content and stuff, and I teach these things about how you do the emotional control stuff. So they want the husband to do it, or they want the husband to take my course or that type of stuff. You know, he's always getting angry at him, all that type of stuff, and thinks that's the way to go. You know, so it's a situation, and I'm asking as a sister. So, you know, she's you know, the mother and the wife. She wants the husband to do something, but you know, the husband has authority in the family and all that type of stuff. So what can she do? How can she get him to buy into it, this type of thing? You know, get him to consider changing his tactics with the kids and this type of stuff. What's the mature thing for her to do in that situation?
I don't know, because I don't know her husband. I mean, as a man, I think this is the type of question that a man should answer, because you know, as a woman, you're supposed to know your husband, right? You're supposed to know how to speak to him, when to speak to him, when he is most responsive, if at all, right? When, you know, how he best understands things. So, for example, if he's a person who wants dalil from Quran and Sunnah before he does anything, you're supposed to know that. You know, if he's a guy who respects, you know, rational arguments, you're supposed to know that. If he's a guy who, you know, his heart gets soft when he thinks of his children or his son or his daughter or whatever, you're supposed to know that. You know, if he's a man who needs to have his belly full before he can take on any big decision making, you're supposed to know that. So it's a case of really, I think, reading the room and being strategic, right, in how you approach the issue. You also, as a wife, you probably know the kind of things that turn him off, and you know the kind of things that make him defensive, and you know the kind of things that tend to make him shut down, whether it's intellectually or emotionally. So you want to make sure that you plan your approach in a way that considers what you know about your husband. And then after that is dua, really, because, you know, I think that's probably an eternal question that women will always be asking. How can I make my husband do what I want him to do? Right? That's just like a universal question. Is there an answer for that? Of course not. But you have to, there isn't one answer, but there are probably ways to get him in a space where he's more receptive. And there are probably things that you can say or show him that will touch him wherever it is that he needs to be touched, for him to become open to those kind of conversations. And it's not very helpful advice, but
no, I think actually that's really helpful. I think it's really helpful. And, you know, kind of similar to what you were saying about, you know, with the potential marriage partners, if he hasn't thought about his family, prompt him to reflect on it. You know, maybe that's something that some sisters need to hear. Like you're saying, those things that you're supposed to know about your husband. If you don't know those things off your head, maybe it's time to reflect on that type of thing. And that's the first step. And, you know, observing your husband or anyone observing their spouse in a way where it's not centered on what you want necessarily, but you are trying to figure them out and see how they react to your own behavior and this type of thing. I think that's oftentimes a good first piece. So that's a good answer. The other question I've gotten a few times, and actually, both these questions I've gotten both ways. I've had the same question about difference in parenting style from brothers too, who want their wives to calm down also and not stop yelling at the kids. I've had the same question, but you're a sister, so I'm asking from the sister's perspective. But brothers who have wives who they're laissez-faire, they're about praying, let's say, and you know they want, and you know that's something like especially if you have daughters, I think especially, you know, and the mother generally spends more time with the kids, even in the non-Muslim families, there's still the mother spending more time with the kids. So especially when they're younger, the kids are taking her more as a model than others. And, you know, it becomes a concerning thing, especially when they get to the 7-8 age, when the prophet said to have them start praying, and the mom is not even consistent about it. You know, like what can the brothers, you know, what would you advise brothers? I mean, I'm sure it's a similar thing, but share your thoughts on that.
Bismillah. I think, again, we're going back to, you know, can you tolerate this aspect about your spouse before kids come along, right? Because if she's inconsistent with prayer when you have kids, my guess is that she's always been inconsistent with prayer, right? She probably always has, and you knew that right from the start. So I would say that, again, these conversations, they need to be had up front, okay? Especially because you gave the example of salah. Salah is one of those things that you don't play with, you know, you don't play with having you know, with praying 5 times a day. And if you've married a woman who doesn't pray 5 times a day, why are you complaining now? How come you're complaining and asking for advice now? It doesn't make any sense. You've lived with her for the last however many years when she's not praying, and you haven't done anything about it up until this point. Again, it comes back to, you know, your wife, you know what she is about, probably, you know, what she responds to, what she doesn't respond to, and you need to employ that, basically, right? Is it an emotional plea? Is it, you know, getting her to think of her children's future? Is it getting her to think of akhirah? You know, is it just saying, look, I want you to start praying, like I'm afraid for you, and as your husband, like, this is something that, you know, it's a big deal to me, right? But what I'm saying is that it's a bit late at that point to be worrying about her not praying, because she should have been praying from before. And similarly, if you married a man who is not consistent with prayer, sis, you have to take accountability for that as well, right? And don't now at this point go asking questions from different people. Say, what can I do? My husband doesn't pray consistently and my kids are seeing that. You chose this man and he probably was always like that, right? So now you have to firstly take responsibility. This is the man that I married. Okay, now what can I actually do? And again, you know, maybe there are ways that you can get through to him. Maybe there are ways that you can speak to him or have other people speak to him. But say you can't. The bigger question for me is, how do you, what can you tolerate? And when it comes to your kids, what are you willing to tolerate? You see? So, I mean, I would like to throw the question back to you. If your wife wasn't praying consistently, and she's never prayed consistently, and you've tried your best to kind of get her to see the importance of it, etc., and she's just not having it, how will you manage your children in that environment and in that situation?
Right.
How would you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you phrased about asking what you're willing to tolerate is, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. And, I will say, and again, I come from culture of like no divorce, and Islam is wiser than that because it does allow for divorce. And part of why the West turned against divorce is because that Christian ethos of you never get divorced no matter what. It did trap people into very unhappy marriages, and it did trap women, especially, into abusive marriages. So, Islam is wiser and balanced in that it has that. So I'm not a fan of threatening divorce at all. And like, and that can be emotionally abusing someone if you do that. However, like if it comes to something that you can't tolerate, like you said, and like the dean should frame our boundaries of what we tolerate and what we don't.
Yes,
It has reason. So
Absolutely.
when it comes time for that, it might be a place where you open up the conversation of, look, like if things continue with this, I'm asking myself whether or not we can continue like this. And it would make me sad to have that happen. I don't want that to have that happen, but that's genuinely how I feel about it. And again, you have, these conversations can be tough. And actually, something I advise people, which I think you'll be on board with, is if you have something really deep and emotional that you need to address with your spouse and really any family member, and I think you've probably had the experience, like with reverts and talking with your parents or other family members about the boundaries you want for your kids or for yourself and this type of stuff. It can be very emotional. It's very, very emotional, and it can be hard. It's hard to have emotional conversations. So something that eases that a little bit is if you write about it first, and you might sit down and construct a letter to that person, and then draft it a few times. Maybe the first time you're just writing out, getting your feelings out of what you really want to say that you're holding in. Then you reread it. You think about how they would receive it. You say to yourself, how can I make this better, productive, and put in a wider spectrum of how I totally feel about this person and include other things. So like writing out a letter, and I mean handwriting, not an email or something like that, because it's different. Like handwriting out a letter to a family member, I think is a very, very healthy exercise. And maybe the thing to do is to give them the letter, because that might be able to speak better than you can speak for yourself. Especially very introverted people, I think, like it can be hard to have conversations sometimes. But even if it's not that you give them the letter, a lot of times writing that thing out, it helps you form in your mind how you need to articulate things. And then when you do get to the difficult conversation, you are more ready to articulate things in a respectful, loving way, and it's productive, and emotions don't get out of hand and this type of thing. That'd be my advice.
Agreed. And probably not addressing it the way people tend to, which is as a reaction. So maybe this is the 3rd time or the 10th time or however much time you've reminded her mother is in and you haven't prayed, right? And in that moment saying, you know what, I don't know how long I can stand this. And you need to fix up, otherwise we're headed for the divorce court.
Absolutely.
No, not helpful. But literally, once you've emotionally regulated, not in the moment, after sitting down and having, like you said, a calm conversation, whoever you are, you're the husband or the wife, a calm conversation, like you said, I think, at least let the person know what's at stake, from a genuine, sincere place. And may Allah make it easy.
I mean.
People have different coping mechanisms with spouses that behave in ways that they're not on board with, right? I have a friend of mine who said, as long as I can worship Allah, and as long as my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is solid, I can tolerate anything, right? But once something starts to impact my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or my iman and my deen, that's when I start to think maybe I need to get up on out of here, because maybe this is now haram for me to stay in this situation, right? And that was her frame. I thought it was a useful frame, but it is a case of, you know, we all want the perfect family and we all want the perfect situation. We want the perfect spouse, perfect husband, perfect kids and everything, right? Will we get the perfect? Probably not. But how much of the imperfect can you tolerate? You know, can you still love and respect your husband if he doesn't pray? Or if he doesn't make Jummah in the masjid, right? Or if he does X, Y, and Z? For different women, the answer will be different, right? With regards to your wife, can you still love and, you know, kind of respect her and look after her and all of that when she doesn't wear the scarf or do this or do that or do that? Again, the answer will be different for different men, because there are many, 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 many Muslim men who absolutely love their wives, cherish their wives, and she doesn't wear hijab. He can tolerate that. Another Muslim man is like, no, 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 no. I cannot tolerate that. Like, that is absolutely the end for me. But that's him. Someone else, they may say, you know what, I can tolerate everything, but the way she speaks to me, I mean, she wears hijab, abaya, she prays, she does all of the things, but the way she speaks to me, I cannot tolerate that. The way she belittles me, the way she humiliates me, the way she swears at me, whatever the case may be, like that I cannot tolerate. So it is very much, I think, about, you know, knowing yourself and being honest with yourself about, you know what, I can still love this person in spite of whatever. And not to do with I should be able to, because I think that's quite difficult, that one. Because, for example, you have a man who, or a woman who is well known in the community, mashallah, on the outward appearance is doing all of the things, you know, they're on the deen, they are Muslim, mashallah, they have lots of respect and admiration from everyone. But that person treats you in a way that is not intolerable, right? Like, you cannot, you know, it's bad. Whatever it is, whether he's cheating or whether she's cheating or whatever the case may be, you know the reality of that person. But you tell yourself, but I should love him because he does so much for charity, because he is so respected in the community, because he's the imam or whatever the case may be. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, genuinely, can you love this person in spite of their flaws, whatever those flaws may be, right? If you can, may Allah accept it. If you can't, then you have to own that and decide, well, what does that mean? You know, can I still do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects me to do for this person, even, you know, in spite of their flaws? And I think that's actually maybe more helpful in some ways. Maybe it's a different frame altogether. Can I still honor this person's rights in spite of their flaws? Can I still treat them as a Muslim, right? Like a Muslim should, kindly, respectfully, you know, generously, all of the things, right? In spite of their flaws. Because if you can, your relationship has a chance of being salvaged. If you can't, or if you won't, then it reminds me of the hadith of the woman who came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, you know, I want to get rid of this man. He is a good man. He's all of the things, but I cannot give him his rights, right? I cannot give him his rights, and I'm worried about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment. And he said, you know, give him back his garden. But that's what it reminds me of. You know, can you honor this person as a Muslim? Can you and will you? And sometimes it's not even about can, brother. That's the thing. So sisters especially, this is a very important space of being honest with yourself, because it's not always about can. It's will you? Are you willing to do it? Are you prepared to do it? Do you choose to do it? Right? Because that's a choice. It's in some rare instances, it's I cannot. Absolutely, I am not able to do it. Physically, it's impossible, right? A few cases, I would argue, right? But a lot of the time, it's like, I don't want to. I don't want to do that. I don't want to forgive. I don't want to overlook the flaws, right? I'm not willing to accept X, Y, and Z, right? That's a choice. And that choice is yours, right? So you need to own that and not say, I can't. There's no way I can. No. You're choosing not to. And that's okay, because you have a choice, you have free will, but that choice comes with consequences. And it's a choice that can be changed if you want to. So these are some of the things that we need to really think about. I don't know. Allahu alam.
Absolutely. And I will just say, and having gone through 10 years of being married to my wife after I became Muslim, where she was not, and having anxiety, we had kids in that time, and having anxiety about that influence on the kids, it absolutely never hurts to increase one's obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to, seek knowledge, implement and act upon that knowledge, and be patient upon it. There's great benefits to lowering the gaze for both spouses in different ways these days, and like Instagram, like we were saying, all that type of stuff, for men and women. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, if there is something in your wife that you dislike, then focus on something that you do like. There is a great wisdom in that. So, Jazakallah khairan, sister. I really appreciate this conversation. I think, with 2 hours is pretty good. And it's been an honor. I appreciate you really taking the time. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it a benefit for the people. Anything good that was said comes from him. Anything wrong that was said comes from ourselves and the evils and deficiencies within our own souls. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we seek repentance from him alone.
Ameen. Jazakallah khairan.
Wa yakum.